Hey guys, Sky from Reignited here, and we are starting a brand new build series on the channel. This is our cheap Chrysler 300. Now, if you remember before, we had the Budget Challenger. If you haven't seen anything about that car, I'll go ahead and post a link to that build right here. But with the Budget Challenger, I basically did a lot of mods that I thought were acceptable for people who had a little bit of disposable income, maybe somebody around my age range, something like that, where you can afford to buy some of these aftermarket parts. Now, I thought it was pretty budget overall because between the price of the car itself and all the aftermarket parts, it was around $15,000. Now, really not that bad at all. A pretty decent price for that vehicle and what it was. Now, it doesn't include any kind of labor. However, that number is out of reach for maybe someone who's in high school or maybe somebody who just graduated high school. Either you got a part-time job or you have a full-time job, but you have other bills involved. So, very minimal amount of disposable income. So, what I wanted to do in this series is I was thinking about myself when I was young and I was in high school and I wanted to have a cool car, but I didn't have any money to buy one, right? So you basically have to make whatever you can out of the car you can get. Now, my question with this series was, can you buy a cheap Hemi vehicle and have it be cool? Like, just how cheap can you get one and get into it and make it run and drive? Now, the thing about Hemis is that they are kind of expensive. They're a little bit more expensive than your standard LS-based vehicle. So the question was, can we get a Hemi vehicle that had some mechanical issues, fix it like a high school kid would have to do, and then make it somewhat cool? So that is the goal of this series. Now, a couple of things I want to point out here. Yes, I do have a very, very nice shop right there. I do have a wonderful lift, and I have a lot of tools. That makes it easier for me to do, but it does not make it impossible for your standard high school kid to achieve what I'm going to do on this. How do I know that? Because I was that high school kid. I have done so many jobs on my back, in the dirt, in the gravel. My parents know what I'm talking about here. I've done all that kind of stuff before. So realistically, these are not things that you cannot do on your own. I'm just going to make it easier on myself because I can. So that is the goal of this series, guys. I need a name for this car. The cheap Chrysler 300 is just not gonna work for me. So I need you to come up with a better name than that. But that is the goal of this series. We're gonna get this thing off the trailer. I'm gonna show you just how rough this thing is. Now, I bought the cheapest Hemi I could find off of Facebook Marketplace. Let me tell you, it's rough. Honestly, looking at it right now, having a little bit of buyer's remorse on this one. It's pretty rough. However, that's kind of what you get, right? When you're looking for a cheap car, you kind of got to take what's available to you. So I'm going to go over the whole car with you and show you all of the issues with it and talk about some of the things we're going to do to fix it. Let me tell you a little bit about the vehicle that we picked up. This is a 2006 Chrysler 300C. Now, that designation is important in the C part because that means that it has a Hemi engine in it. Now, when you're looking for one of these things online, a lot of people will list a 300 as a 300C when it is not, in fact, Hemi equipped. So you gotta be a little bit careful about that. A couple of indicators that you wanna have when you're looking for these to make sure that it has the Hemi engine. There's a badge on the side of the front fender that says 300C. And then on the rear trunk lid, there's also another badge that says 300C. So those are good indicators, but by far the quickest way to tell whether or not one of these is Hemi equipped is by looking at the headlights. The stock touring headlights, the ones with the V6, have a flat upper and lower portion, so they just look like a big rectangle essentially. Only on the Hemi equipped vehicles does it have this rounded portion here on the side. So that tells you 100% that you are dealing with a Hemi equipped vehicle. So real nice, you can tell that at a glance. Now, this particular car has 240,000 miles on it with all of the wear and tear that you can expect with that kind of mileage. And you kind of have to look past the color a little bit because is this car blue? Is it green? I have no idea. You're gonna have to ask Brian Scotto that for a definitive answer. But right now, I'm gonna walk you around the vehicle and show you everything I can see on the surface that's wrong with this vehicle. So we're going to start with just aesthetics right now. If you'll notice, these wheels do not actually match. These wheels are for a Dodge Charger or a Dodge Magnum of around the similar vintage. They are not Chrysler 300 wheels. And what's really nice, they don't actually match the other wheels. These are in fact Chrysler 300 wheels. I don't know if these are the stock wheels for this car or from a V6 model, but whatever, they're all hideous. And the tires are pretty much junk all the way around. Here's one of the badges I was talking about saying Hemi C on the side. easy indicator there, but it's also easy to slap that badge on a V6 equipped vehicle. So make sure you do your due diligence. All right, in the front here, yeah, headlights looking a little bit rough. And yeah, that's not actually tightened down. This side, ooh, this side's actually tightened down. That's a miracle. I didn't think it was. So the front bumper tried to fall off on me when it was coming home. There's a lot of scrapes and scratches that the camera is just not really picking up. A lot of worn areas there. The engine itself doesn't look too bad. Somebody has just done a water pump replacement. It is brand spanking new in there. Also, it has this really terrible aftermarket intake in there, which of course does not even have a correct grommet for your intake air temp sensor. So that's really doing a lot of air filtration right there. That's working well, not bad. And then moving around the vehicle, the hood itself has a ton of scratches in it. It's just all tore up. And then on this side of the hood, I have no idea what exactly happened here, but you can see just how bent that is. I mean, what is going on there? Like, I have no clue what happened there. How, like, this thing get bent up and then bent, I have no idea. It's the weirdest thing. Anyway, so the hood is pretty messed up on there. Keep going around, a lot more scratches. There's a lot of little dents and dings in the body, but that's kind of to be expected for this kind of age. And here's something weird. I'm missing my rear door handle, and it's missing on both sides. And we are also missing our side skirt down along the bottom edge there. So who knows what happened there. And also on this side, we get a pretty big dent on that passenger side fender there. But again, all stuff you would expect for something, a vehicle of this dollar amount and age range. A couple more dents along the side here. The back actually doesn't look too bad. The back is fairly clean. I mean, it's dirty, but not a lot of big damage. A couple of scrapes here on the bumper, and then on the rear quarter here, we get back into the scrapes and more dents. There is a dent directly in the center of the gas door. Somebody explain to me how you do a dent directly in the center of a gas door. Never seen that before. All right, again, missing our other door handle here. And then we have trim issues right there. But the rest of the door isn't in too bad of a shape. We have a failure of our driver's side mirror there. Can't really see too much of anything out of that. Then if you look at the side panels here, clearly they had some form of probably chrome strips or something glued to this. So I got to get rid of all of this adhesive tape here and try to repaint these things black. All the rest of the trim, as you could imagine, is all sun faded here. I mean, this is a Texas vehicle, so the sun hits it pretty good. Now, let's transition to the interior. The interior isn't terrible, but it's not great. The center console lid is all dirty, nasty. I mean, the camera makes it look a little bit better. The carpets in here are really disgusting, nasty as well. However, the passenger seat isn't too bad. The rear seats are in great shape, but the driver's seat has a pretty big tear right there in the bolster. But again, not too much you can do about it with this kind of mileage and how cheap it was. Dash, not too bad. Everything actually looks somewhat okay there, except for the weird little bow issue happening here on the top. That's kind of strange. Looking at the rear seats, actually really nice back here. You can tell there was not a whole lot of time spent back here by anybody. So these seats are pretty nice. Just a general cleanup here will be needed. I did notice down here, this is one of the hoses for the washer fluid system. So clearly that is not working properly. Then let's go back to the trunk here. Now the trunk struts don't hold anything, so I need to replace those. And then I threw one of my batteries in here because this battery is completely dead. I don't know if it's just a battery issue or if I have a battery drain problem happening as well. There's a lot of stuff thrown into the back here, which is always concerning when you're working on a used vehicle. I have a throttle body here, drive-by-wire throttle body. A little concerned about that. And then also, importantly, right here, that's one of the bolts that goes to the water pump that I saw that was just replaced. So I'm kind of concerned about what that's doing back here and why that's here. So that's your basic overview of the 300. Honestly, there's a lot of just physical issues that have happened here. A lot of just random tears and dents and scratches. So not the prettiest 300 I've ever seen in my life, by far. But also, I mean, it's not the end of the world, especially if you are a high school kid or just graduated. I still think this can be a really cool car for someone like that. So what we're going to do in this series is we're going to keep a running tally from start to finish of exactly how much money we spend on this vehicle. Now, the point of this series is not to do a whole lot of modifications and change a bunch of stuff around. Rather, it is just to fix the vehicle and bring it back to a running, driving, daily driver standpoint, something that's reliable for someone to drive. And then those modifications can come down the road. We're just trying to get it back on the road for as cheap as we possibly can. So with that being said, you've seen all the exterior warts on this thing. How much money do you think I paid for this car? Go ahead and leave your comments down below. All right, so I paid $1,000 even for this car, and honestly, I still think I overpaid. And the reason I think that is because the engine does have a serious mechanical issue. It only runs on 7 cylinders right now. It has an issue with overheating, and you can feel it just misfiring like crazy. Now, given the fact that they just put a water pump in this thing, I'm pretty sure they knew the issue was there and they're trying to figure out what the problem was. I personally think we have an issue with the head gasket problem in here, or perhaps the radiator itself is failing, all common things on these cars. So I'm gonna take you guys with me from start to finish. We're gonna diagnose exactly what's wrong with this car. We're gonna fix it as cheaply as we possibly can and see just how much money we spend to get there. I think the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and check the codes, because it does have a check engine light on right now, and with clearly the engine misfiring, I'd like to know what the code says. Now, I'm going to be using my professional scanner, but you don't have to have a really professional scanner. These are actually very, very simple codes to determine. In fact, even if you run by like an O'Reilly's or an AutoZone, they will check that for you for free, so you will know what that code is. However, if you want to go with a code reader, and I strongly suggest that you do, you can go with a cheap one. You can get them online for as little as $30 for just these little handheld readers that will actually give you the codes. Now, they are limited. They do not give you all of the codes, and they do not give you all of the codes for the other systems. But for powertrain related codes, I'm talking engine or transmission, they will generally read for those. So I think they're a great pickup to have. All right, let's figure out what these codes are. So taking a look at our codes that we have a P0038, which is for our oxygen sensor, bank 1, sensor 2, so that's the second one down, heater circuit high. Now that will not cause any sort of a misfire or anything like that. That is purely an emissions related code. Then we have P0113 active, which is intake air temp sensor circuit high. And then we have a U1418, which is implausible right wheel distance signal received. So that's an ABS signal on there. All right, so we want to focus on our middle one right there, intake air temp sensor circuit high. That also will not cause a misfire, but I do want to at least rule it out. And I came over here to take a look at the intake air temp sensor. It doesn't matter that it's not actually plugged into the intake. All it cares about is the temperature it's reading. And I looked at it, and the sheathing is all messed up on here. And then here, there's a little splice in there, but that's also not messing things up. However, an issue I did find was I just went ahead and pulled on it, and it wasn't actually clicked into the connector all the way anyway. So that's probably the source of our circuit high code. I'm gonna plug this thing in, we'll clear that code and see if it comes back. Sure enough, that code went away, and we do not have the heater circuit code either, which I suspect that one will probably come back. But the intake air temp sensor one is not there. However, what we are not seeing here, which I'm kind of surprised about, is we are not seeing any sort of a misfire code. Now, when I run this thing, you can tell it's down a cylinder. It's running on 7. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and fire this thing up real quick, and then I'll try to diagnose it the old style way, where I'm gonna pull the coil plugs one at a time while the engine is running and see if I can't verify if the engine note changes or not. So if the engine note changes when I undo the plug, that cylinder was firing correctly. However, if the engine note does not change when I pull that plug, that's likely the cylinder that's not firing. All right, so pretty much all of them are making a big change except for this one right here, cylinder number 1. Now watch what happens when I do cylinder 3. The engine note changes and it starts to shake a lot more. So I'm kind of thinking that cylinder number 1 is going to be our issue. I'm going to cheat and I'm going to use my professional scan tool now to verify my decision and see if the Misfire monitor is saying that cylinder number 1 is the one that we're having issues with. All right, so I'm running my Misfire monitor here and look at cylinder number 1. Misfiring away like crazy. Now you'll notice some of the other cylinders are also registering a misfire, cylinder 2 specifically, but it's going up very, very slowly as compared to this one. A lot of times it will register as a misfire on the adjacent cylinder because of its misfiring on this one. So I'm thinking that our major issue is right here on cylinder number 1. We could potentially have an issue with cylinder 2, but honestly, I think cylinder 1 is our one, because look how fast that's going up over there, comparatively. Yeah, see that? There's a huge difference there. So I think our issue is on cylinder number 1. So let's figure out why cylinder 1 is misfiring. Hopefully you guys can tell that's exactly what I did there. Basically, I just unplugged the coil plugs while the engine was running, and you can definitely tell a distinct note in the change of the engine running, and also the engine will start to shake a lot more because now it is imbalanced because one of the cylinders isn't firing. So it's a quick, easy way to kind of run through and check. It's not 100% foolproof. Sometimes it can be hard to tell, hard to discern the difference. On this car, ironically, it was a little bit easier because the rear mufflers have been deleted. So the engine is much louder than it normally is. Very much easier to hear that tone change when you actually unplug one of the coils and the cylinder stops firing. So basically I went through and tested cylinders 2, 4, 6, and 8. The engine note changed distinctly for all of those cylinders, and then when you plug it back in, the note changes again and the engine smooths back out. Then once I went over to cylinder number 1, it definitely didn't seem like there was a change happening there, and then I tested cylinders 3, 5, and 7. Definitely it was changing on all of those cylinders. I went back to cylinder number 1, tested it a couple more times. Does not seem like the engine was changing at all. So again, I just verified it using my actual scan tool. Sure enough, cylinder number 1 is misfiring almost constantly. So it's one of those things. It's an old school way of checking it. However, it is still effective. You do not need the expensive scan tools. It's just a nice feature for me to have to actually verify my findings. So now we've identified that cylinder number 1 is our issue. Let's go ahead and do some more checks on this thing, see if we can't figure out why it's not firing. Now we're diagnosing this thing. The first bit that I want to impart to you guys is something that I did not really take to heart for years. And that is something my dad tried to instill in me from the very beginning. And now I understand why he did that. It's called the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. Start with the easy stuff first. So many times our inclination is to say, oh, it is a head gasket, or oh, the engine's blown up or something. We always go worst case scenario. There's no reason to do that. Start with the really simple stuff first and then progressively work your way towards the more serious things. Perhaps it is a blown head gasket, as I think it might be. But I'm not going to say it is until we get to that point. So let's start really, really simple. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to swap the coil from cylinder number 1 to cylinder number 3. And then we're going to swap the spark plugs from cylinder number 1 to cylinder number 5. In that way, we can verify that if the misfire stays with cylinder number 1, the problem is not with the coil or the spark plugs, but if it jumps to one of those other cylinders, we'll be able to follow it and know exactly what our problem is. Now, because I am going to have the spark plugs out I am going to do a quick compression test. Now, compression testers are not that expensive to buy, or if you're really hard up, you can go and rent them from places like AutoZone or O'Reilly's, things like that. So not a huge investment involved there. Sometimes you can even just put a deposit down and then use it for free. And when you give it back to them, they give you your deposit back. So it's a neat setup. But a compression test is always a good idea to have when you have a misfire on a cylinder. It's just one more thing to rule out of the equation. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's get this stuff apart. So I just pulled the spark plugs out. Let me show you what I found here. That spark plug electrode is smashed flat. So the real question is, did this spark plug get damaged before they actually stuck it back in there, or is something inside the cylinder smashing it flat? That would be more my expectation on this thing. I think we may have a dropped valve seat in there. But again, there's no reason to jump ahead, so let's go ahead and straighten this guy back out. I actually have some spare spark plugs, so I'm just gonna grab one of those, toss it in there. We'll fire it up and see if this thing runs normally. If it still does not run normally, if it's still misfiring on that cylinder, then we have a deeper issue. So before I went ahead and got that other spark plug and stuck it in there, I want to do one more check with something, a tool that I have called an inspection scope. Essentially what it is like a little tiny camera eye on the end of a long flexible tube, and you can run it down into the cylinder to actually look inside there and see what's happening. There's very, very cheap versions available of this now. I believe you can get them at Harbor Freight as well. I'll go ahead and put a link to one of those down below. They're not expensive and they're a great tool to have. Now, why did I do that? Well, in this particular case, it's because a 2006 era Chrysler Hemi is very much known for dropping valve seats. Now, on one of these engines, if they get hot, especially, that's when they tend to drop a valve seat, and this engine overheated. So I figured I'd double check that while I had the spark plugs out. And what do you know, that's exactly what happened. I can see the damage now. This head's got to come off, no question about it. And I may end up having to replace the cylinder head as well, because it looks like the cylinder head is damaged. So this cylinder head's coming off, but rest assured, I will show you guys the entire process. So here's the inspection scope here, and you are looking at the top of the piston right there. So if you can see my little scope here is down inside the spark plug tube. I just ran it down in there. We are looking directly at this top of the piston. So if I move it up a little bit, so now you're down through the spark plug hole, and bam. So that's not looking so good. So I suspect that the bottom side of the cylinder head has been damaged, probably beyond repair. And that's never a good sign. So we're gonna take this thing completely apart, get this thing all fixed up. Now, because we've identified that our piston is actually damaged in our cylinder, this engine's gotta come out. There's no other way around it. We gotta take it out and put it on a stand so that we can actually get that piston rod out of there. That way we can inspect the bore of the cylinder and make sure it's not too scratched up beyond repair. If it is, if the cylinder walls are so badly damaged that you cannot repair them by a simple hone or taking it to a machine shop to do a hone job on it, you don't want to do a bore. You don't want to have to bore the cylinders out, because that's going to be more trouble and more money than it's worth. But if they can hone it, or if you can hone it yourself, then it's still a good buy. If the cylinder walls are so badly damaged that they would have to be bored out, at that point, yes, this probably was not a good purchase and you have to move on and just accept the loss. But honestly, if you spend $1,000 to get into it and then you take it apart and you find out, well, it's not worth actually fixing it, it's between scrapping the car and selling some of the other good parts that are still on it, you'd probably almost break even on your $1,000. So it's still not that big of a loss, and you'll learn a lot along the way. I want to hear from you guys. What would you like to see next on the channel? And if you can, do me a great big favor, hit that subscribe button and also the notification bell. That really helps out the channel a lot. We'll see you guys next time on Reignited.